There are moments in life when the quiet strategies we use to survive stop working. Moments when avoidance collapses under its own weight. Moments when silence becomes louder than speech. For me, that moment arrived after months of delay, hesitation, and internal negotiation. It was the moment when I was finally forced to face a decision I had been postponing, fully aware that once it was spoken aloud, nothing would ever return to its former shape. My name is Ibrahim. About 8 months before that moment, I found myself sitting in a closed room with men who represented the two spiritual worlds that had shaped my entire existence. Islam and Christianity. Imams, pastors, elders, and respected leaders from both traditions. Men who had known me since I was young. Men who believed, sincerely, that they were defending truth, order, and moral clarity. They were not gathered to listen. They were there to decide what to do with me. The demand was simple, at least on the surface. Choose. Not later. Not privately. Not slowly. Now. Islam or Christianity. You cannot stand on two boats. You cannot live with divided allegiance. This confusion must end. The words came in different forms, spoken with different tones, but the meaning never changed. Each repetition tightened the room. Each sentence narrowed my options further. There was no allowance for process. No patience for complexity. No space for a journey that did not move in a straight line. As I sat there, I felt the weight of expectation pressing down on me from every direction. I could sense their concern, but also their frustration. I could feel their fear that I represented something dangerous. Someone who blurred boundaries they believed had to remain firm. Someone whose life did not fit into clean categories. What struck me most was what they did not ask. No one asked how I was doing. No one asked what the struggle had cost me. No one asked how long I had been carrying this alone. They wanted clarity. A declaration. A single word that would allow them to place me back into a familiar box. Islam or Christianity. As I listened, something inside me began to fracture. Not because I was confused about what I believed, but because I knew my life could not be reduced to a label without violence to the truth of my experience. And to understand why that moment mattered so deeply, you need to understand where I came from and how I arrived there. I was not born into confusion. I was born into Islam. Islam was not a compartment of life in my family. It was the atmosphere. It shaped our days, our language, our sense of right and wrong. Faith was woven into ordinary moments, not separated from them. Prayer structured time. Fasting trained discipline. Reverence for God shaped behavior. From a young age, I learned how to pray, how to bow, how to submit my body and will before God. During Ramadan, I memorized verses of the Quran. I learned that God is one, merciful, just, and sovereign over all things. I was taught to respect elders, care for the poor, take responsibility for my actions, and restrain my desires rather than being ruled by them. These teachings were not abstract ideas. They were lived practices. They shaped my character. They formed my conscience. They taught me that faith was not only about belief, but about conduct. For most of my life, I did not question my faith. There was no rebellion in me, no resentment, no desire to escape. Islam was home. And that matters, because what happened later was not born from anger, dissatisfaction, or rejection. I was not searching for another religion. I was not looking for a spiritual alternative. I was not trying to abandon my culture or family. Then, about 2 years before that meeting, something happened that I did not plan for and could not control. I encountered Jesus Christ. Not as a concept. Not as a historical figure. Not as a topic of debate or comparison. But as a living reality. The experience did not match the dramatic stories people often expect. There were no visions or voices. What happened was quieter and more unsettling. A moment of overwhelming clarity. An encounter that cut through my assumptions and left me unable to explain what had occurred, yet unable to deny it. Something shifted inside me. I did not stop believing in God. I did not abandon monotheism. I did not reject everything I had been taught. But I could no longer pretend that nothing had happened. And once something touches you at that depth, pretending becomes impossible. That was the beginning of the tension. When your inner world changes faster than your external life, you try to manage the difference quietly. You try to protect the people you love. You try to buy time. That is what I did. In private, I began reading the Bible. I prayed to Jesus alone in my room, behind closed doors, learning words I had never spoken before. I attended church services quietly, sitting in the back, listening more than talking, observing everything carefully. In public, especially around my family, I remained Muslim. I prayed as I always had. I fasted during Ramadan. I recited the Quran when others were present. Outwardly, nothing appeared to change. I told myself this was temporary. That I needed time to understand what had happened. Time to protect my family from pain. Time to see if these two realities could exist without destroying everything I loved. At first, I believed I was being careful. Thoughtful. Wise. But careful slowly became divided. And divided became exhausting. I was living two spiritual lives that never fully touched. I prayed as a Christian in secret and as a Muslim in public. I believed I was protecting everyone else, but I was quietly tearing myself apart. In Muslim spaces, I felt like I was hiding something essential. In Christian spaces, I felt incomplete, cautious, afraid of being seen as not fully committed. I belonged everywhere and nowhere at the same time. That tension did not stay invisible. People began to notice changes in my speech, my hesitation, my silence in conversations where I once spoke freely. Muslims began asking questions. Why did I speak differently about Jesus? Why did I hesitate during certain discussions? Why did I seem less certain? Christians noticed too. My reluctance to publicly identify. My careful language. My caution when Islam came up. Suspicion grew on both sides. And slowly, without my consent, stories formed around me. That I was trying to mix Islam and Christianity. That I was creating a hybrid faith. That I was spreading confusion. None of it was true. I was not teaching anyone. I was not leading. I was surviving an internal transformation that did not fit established expectations. But rumors do not wait for permission. They multiply. And eventually, they demand an answer. The rumors did not fade with time. They thickened. They gained shape and direction. What began as quiet questions turned into assumptions, and assumptions slowly hardened into judgments. Eventually, the tension reached a point where it could no longer remain informal or unspoken. The ambiguity surrounding my life had become, in the eyes of both communities, a problem that required intervention. That was when the meeting was arranged. It was presented as a conversation, but from the beginning, it carried the weight of a verdict. Religious leaders from both Islam and Christianity wanted to sit down with me. Not to understand my journey, but to resolve what they believed was confusion spreading outward from my silence. They wanted clarity, not process. A decision, not reflection. The room itself felt symbolic. On one side sat an Imam who had taught me when I was a child. His presence carried years of trust, guidance, and shared history. Beside him were respected Muslim elders, including members of my own family. Men whose approval had shaped my sense of belonging since I was young. Men whose disappointment I feared more than their anger. On the other side sat Christian leaders. The pastor of the church I had been attending. Elders who had watched me carefully, measuring my words, waiting to see where I truly stood. Different theology. Different language. Same expectation. The air was heavy before anyone spoke. The Imam began. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle, like a teacher correcting a student who had gone too far without realizing it. He said that I was confusing people. Young Muslims respected me, he explained. They saw me praying in Muslim spaces while speaking about Jesus in ways that went beyond prophecy. They were beginning to wonder whether the two faiths could be blended. He paused deliberately. Islam is clear, he said. There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the final messenger. Jesus is honored and respected, but he is not divine. You must decide. Have you returned to Islam, or have you left it? The words settled heavily in the room. Then the pastor spoke. His tone was different, more direct, but the message was almost identical. He quoted Jesus. You cannot serve two masters. Either Jesus is Lord, or he is not. Christianity is not something you add to Islam. It is a complete commitment. He leaned forward slightly. Are you a follower of Jesus Christ, or aren't you? Silence followed. Every eye turned toward me. Some faces showed concern. Some frustration. A few revealed anger carefully disguised as righteousness. No one asked what this decision had cost me. No one acknowledged how long I had lived with this tension alone. They were waiting for a word. One word. And as I sat there, my heart racing, my thoughts colliding, I realized something terrifying. No matter what I said next, something precious would be lost. If I said Christianity, I would publicly sever myself from my family, my heritage, and my past. I would confirm every fear Muslims have about converts. That we abandon everything we come from. That we look down on our roots once we cross the line. If I said Islam, I would deny the encounter that had transformed me. I would lie to everyone in that room, and worse, I would lie to myself. I would be choosing comfort over integrity. Belonging over truth. Either answer carried a cost I was not sure I could bear. That was when I realized something crucial. The question they were asking was not the question I was actually facing. So I took a breath and asked if I could speak before answering. The Imam nodded. I looked around the room and asked, carefully and slowly, why this had to be a choice between Islam and Christianity. Why could it not be a choice between truth and falsehood? Between integrity and fear? Between living honestly and living a divided life? The reaction was immediate. Several voices spoke at once. Some accused me of avoiding the issue. Others said I was hiding behind philosophy. The tension rose sharply, filling the room like static. The pastor raised his hand for silence. He said that my questions sounded deep, but they were a distraction. Truth, he insisted, is found in Jesus Christ alone. He quoted scripture. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Therefore, truth versus falsehood is the same as Christianity versus every other religion, including Islam. Before I could respond, an elderly Muslim scholar spoke. From their perspective, he said, truth is found in the Quran, the final revelation. Islam completes and corrects what came before, including what was given to Jesus. So again, the question remained unchanged. Do you accept this final revelation, or do you reject it? Every attempt I made to widen the conversation was pulled back into the same narrow corridor. Choose. Declare. Submit. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not in despair, but in clarity. I realized that if I answered the way they wanted, I would be surrendering my conscience to institutions that cared more about boundaries than about truth as it is actually lived. I would be allowing fear of exclusion to shape my faith. So I stood up. I said I could not choose the way they wanted me to choose. Not that day. Not under those terms. The room went completely silent. The Imam looked shocked. The pastor looked deeply disappointed. Before anyone could interrupt, I raised my hand and asked for a moment to explain. I told them they were asking me to choose between religious labels. Between institutional identities that make sense on paper. But that was not the choice I was actually facing. The real choice, I said, was whether I would follow where I believed God was leading me, or whether I would allow religious communities to pressure me into a version of myself that made them more comfortable. I turned toward the Muslim leaders. My encounter with Jesus Christ was real, I said. I did not search for it. I did not try to leave Islam. It disrupted my life in ways I did not ask for. But it revealed something I cannot deny. I paused carefully. Jesus revealed himself to me in a way that left no doubt in my mind that he is who he claimed to be. The Son of God. The Savior. I cannot unknow that. I cannot pretend it did not happen simply because it complicates my relationship with my family and my community. Then I turned toward the Christian leaders. But I cannot pretend my Islamic upbringing was worthless. I was taught about the oneness of God, prayer, justice, mercy, and care for the poor. Those are not lies simply because they came through Islam. Christianity itself affirms those truths. The tension in the room deepened. So when you ask me to choose between Islam and Christianity, I continued, I will give you an honest answer, even if it does not satisfy you. I follow Jesus Christ. I believe he died for my sins and rose from the dead. I believe he is the way to the Father. In that sense, I am a Christian. Reactions came immediately, but I raised my hand again. But I am a Christian who honors his Islamic heritage. A Christian shaped by Muslim values. A Christian who recognizes truth in much of what Islam teaches. I am not a Muslim pretending to be Christian. I am not a Christian pretending to be Muslim. I follow Jesus while refusing to despise the tradition that formed me. The room erupted. Muslim leaders felt I had chosen Christianity and was softening the blow. Christian leaders felt I was refusing to fully cut ties with my past. No one seemed satisfied. Then something unexpected happened. A younger Christian leader who had been silent spoke up. He asked them to let me finish. He said he believed something important was being said. That moment of pause changed the tone of the room. I continued, now. I said they were so focused on protecting institutional boundaries that they were missing what was actually happening in people's lives. God does not operate according to our categories, I said. He works in human hearts in ways that disrupt systems and labels. When I encountered Jesus, I did not stop believing in the one true God I was taught about. I began to understand God more deeply. When I followed Jesus, I did not abandon prayer, justice, or mercy. Those practices were transformed and given new meaning. Following Jesus did not make me anti-Islam. It made me someone who could recognize truth wherever it exists, while anchoring my life in what I believe is ultimate truth. The room fell into a silence that felt heavier than the arguments that came before it. It was no longer charged with interruption or raised voices. It was the kind of silence that signals a shift from debate to judgment. Faces that had once shown frustration now reflected something deeper. Calculation. Grief. Resignation. An older Muslim leader, a man who had known me since childhood, finally spoke. His voice was slow and weighed down, not with anger, but with sorrow. He said he understood what I was trying to express. He acknowledged that my words carried sincerity. But from an Islamic perspective, he explained, what I was describing still amounted to leaving Islam. If I believed Jesus was divine, if I worshipped him as God, then I had abandoned Islamic monotheism. That belief, he said plainly, was shirk, the association of partners with Allah. The most serious transgression in Islam. I listened without interrupting. I nodded and said that I understood. I said I was not going to lie about what I believed to make it more acceptable. I did believe Jesus was divine. I did worship him. And yes, by Islamic theology, I had left Islam. The room went silent again. There was no shouting. No dramatic reaction. The weight of that admission settled slowly, like dust after a collapse. Then I turned toward the Christian leaders. I said that I was also not willing to denounce Islam as entirely false. I would not treat Muslims as enemies of truth. I would not speak with contempt about the religion that shaped me or about my family who practiced it sincerely. I refused to pretend my past was meaningless. At that point, the pastor stood up. His expression was conflicted, almost torn between respect and frustration. He said he appreciated my honesty, but insisted that clarity was still missing. Muslims needed to know I had fully left Islam so they could respond accordingly. Christians needed to know I was fully committed so they could trust me. By remaining in what he called an ambiguous middle, he said, I was helping no one. I met his eyes and said, quietly and respectfully, that I disagreed. I said the ambiguity that made institutions uncomfortable was where real life actually happened. I explained that most journeys from Islam to Christianity were not clean or simple. They were slow, painful, and complicated. People did not shed their past like a coat and step into a new identity untouched. By demanding a simple answer, I said, institutions were forcing reality into frameworks designed for safety, not truth. No one spoke for a moment. Then the Imam, the man who had taught me how to pray as a child, broke the silence. His voice was steady, thoughtful, and free of threat. He said that from his perspective, I had chosen Christianity. I followed Jesus as Lord. I believed he was divine. I worshipped him. That was Christianity, not Islam. The things I said about honoring my heritage, he added, were not my position. They were how I was trying to make peace with the choice I had already made. He was not angry. He was naming reality as he understood it. And strangely, I felt no urge to argue. Because he was right, at least within his framework. By Islamic theology, I had left Islam. I was no longer pretending otherwise. What neither side fully understood was this. Leaving Islam did not mean erasing my past. Following Christ did not require hating where I came from. I stood there between worlds, fully claimed by neither, fully understood by none. When the meeting ended, there was no resolution in the way anyone hoped for. No prayer. No embrace. No sense of closure. I walked out having lost something from both sides. But I also walked out with something intact. My integrity. I had not chosen comfort over truth. I had not traded honesty for acceptance. I had not reduced my life to a label to make others feel safe. That day taught me something painful and freeing at the same time. Sometimes following God does not lead you into clearer belonging. It leads you into deeper loneliness. Sometimes the price of faithfulness is standing alone, knowing you spoke honestly even when no one applauded. People often assume that after moments like that, everything becomes clear. It does not. There was no dramatic resolution after I left that room. No sense of arrival. Only distance. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence. Invitations that quietly disappeared. Among Muslims, reactions varied. Some avoided me completely. Others spoke with a politeness that felt heavier than anger. A few tried to bring me back, convinced I had been misled. Most simply did not know what to do with me anymore. Among Christians, the response was different but not easier. Some welcomed me warmly, relieved that I had finally spoken openly. Others remained cautious. My past made them uncomfortable. My refusal to despise where I came from made them suspicious. I learned something in that season. Conversion does not always move you from outside to inside. Sometimes it moves you from one edge to another. I also learned that loneliness can be spiritual. Not the loneliness of being unseen, but the loneliness of being seen clearly and still not fitting anywhere. There were nights when I wondered whether honesty had been a mistake. Whether life would have been easier had I chosen a simpler story. Whether the clarity everyone demanded was worth the cost. But every time I imagined myself living a lie, denying what I believed, performing a version of myself to maintain belonging, something inside me closed in on itself. And I knew I could not return to that. After I walked out of that room, life did not rearrange itself into something clearer or easier. There was no sense of arrival, no sudden peace that erased the weight of what had happened. Instead, there was distance. Awkward silences. Relationships that thinned without explanation. Spaces that once felt familiar began to feel foreign. Some conversations stopped mid-sentence and were never resumed. Invitations that once came naturally disappeared quietly. I began to notice how often belonging depends not on sincerity, but on predictability. When people know how to place you, they know how to treat you. When they cannot, they hesitate, withdraw, or redefine the relationship entirely. Among Muslims, the reactions were complex and varied. Some avoided me altogether, unsure of how to speak to someone who no longer fit within their framework. Others maintained a surface-level politeness that felt heavier than open hostility. A few tried earnestly to bring me back, convinced that I had been misled or emotionally confused. Many simply did not know what to do with someone who had crossed the line while refusing to despise what lay behind him. Among Christians, the response was also mixed. Some welcomed me with warmth and relief, glad that I had finally spoken clearly about my faith in Jesus. Others remained cautious. My past made them uneasy. My refusal to treat Islam as pure falsehood confused them. They wanted a cleaner break, a clearer narrative, a testimony that fit comfortably into familiar language. I began to understand something that no one had prepared me for. Conversion does not always move you from the margins into the center. Sometimes it moves you from one edge to another. You exchange one form of exclusion for another, often quieter, often more subtle. That season taught me that loneliness has different forms. There is the loneliness of being unseen, and then there is the loneliness of being seen clearly and still not belonging. I experienced the second kind. People knew where I stood, but they did not know where to place me. There were nights when I questioned whether honesty had been worth the cost. Whether life would have been easier had I chosen a simpler story. Whether clarity, as institutions define it, was worth the relationships it quietly dissolves. I imagined what it would have been like to perform certainty instead of living truthfully. To say the right words. To remain acceptable. But every time I imagined returning to a divided life, something inside me tightened. I knew I could not live by pretending. I had already learned what it cost to hide. I was not willing to return to that kind of fracture. What I carry now is not certainty in the way institutions demand it. It is something quieter and heavier. A commitment to live without duplicity. A refusal to erase my past to justify my present. A willingness to be misunderstood rather than untrue. I no longer expect everyone to understand my journey. I no longer seek universal approval. I understand now that faith is not proven by how well it fits into approved categories. It is revealed by what you are willing to lose in order to remain honest. Sometimes following God does not lead to clearer belonging. It leads to standing alone with integrity intact. And sometimes the most faithful choice is not the one that brings applause, but the one that allows you to live without pretending.